Malcolm's not joining us. We are recording. Perfect. We're live streaming. Yep, we're live streaming. Okay. Rob, this is a continuation of a public hearing. So at the very beginning, we're going to open up for public comment through hand raising, just so you know, okay?
All right, all set.
All right, great. So good evening and welcome to the Board of Trustees continuation of the adjourned public hearing. Motion to reopen the public hearing on the Elk Homes Centro Development Project.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll do second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I didn't hear from Bubba.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. So we are going to go to the public, right to the public comment section of this. The documents, we have both a resolution for the special permit, and we also have a resolution regarding the secret negative declaration. Those are both posted on the village's website, both on the Centro button page as, hello? Do you guys see me?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay.
We can see you. Hear you.
I'm sorry, my computer's freaking out again, folks. Give me a sec. I'm back in. Wow. I don't know what's going on. I have a gremlin. They're on both the Centro button page and on the calendar entry for this meeting. So hopefully everyone in the public has had a chance to look them over. So if you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. We'll pull you in now. We probably would start with members of the public who are in attendance. I'll give here we go. We got our first hand, Surette Dim and Frank Grant. Please, Rob, unmute them. Thank you.
Okay. Are we unmuted?
Yeah, you're good. You're good to go, Surette.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for keeping the public hearing open and giving us a chance to take a look at the two new documents, which I looked at briefly. I really only have one question and then one comment. The one thing that I looked at, and this is in keeping with one of my, continued concerns there, I looked at the issue regarding dewatering of the site and talked about the Cultec that's going to be used there permanently. I don't recall whether it was at the last real, actual prior to virtual meetings, or if it was at the last virtual meeting. But there was a comment that Benny Salanitro made regarding the type of system that he was recommending, and that the applicant had some concerns and comments that he felt were basically, going too far. And it's not clear to me from the final disposition of this, whether or not that has been what his original thoughts were, Benny's thoughts were, or if that has been modified somehow to accommodate the concerns of the applicant. So I know this is not necessarily a back and forth, but if someone could clarify that, I would appreciate that.
I think that would be for Pat Cleary, because I'm sure that was discussed at the planning board level.
It was, Surette. So there's still the next stage to this, which is the site plan approval. Benny's original concept, while it has been, it has evolved slightly, it still remains essentially the same plan that you saw originally, Surette.
Okay, well, you said modified slightly. That's what concerns me, because I know that the applicant was very much against the extra step that Benny was suggesting. And I'm asking again, Is that extra step part of it, or has that been taken out?
Right, so it's my understanding the extra step is still in the plan. Subject again to the planning board approving it at their meeting.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, I see that the board is maintaining continued architectural review through the end of this project. It's been my experience over many years that even when that happens, that once a project goes into construction, that in the field, there are things that happen that are sometimes referred to as value engineering. And I would like to make certain that field changes do not become the purview of the building inspector, and that value engineering does not take place, and that whatever it is that has been determined by the group of architects that are advising the board, and that the board's final approval on those architectural features come out exactly the way the board has determined, and that decisions are not made in the field outside of the purview of the board.
Yes, thank you, Saret. That's our concern as well. And if we haven't addressed that, I believe we addressed it in, trying to find it now. Was it 11? No, we'll get to it.
But
Yeah.
Mayor, this is Jim, and certainly you've retained the jurisdiction to grant that architectural review approval at a later date. And when you do that, I think that would be the appropriate time to include any language about, the strictness of adherence to it and the, changes that can and couldn't be made and so forth.
So beyond the requirement for a construction manager, we could include some additional language in that approval.
Sure. I think the comment was a concern that you would approve architecture and that somehow it would change and be different from what you approve because the building department would allow that to happen. So when you do ultimately pass on the architecture, when you do that, you certainly can make clear what you want to make clear about that.
And I know that we will, because that's been a conversation that we've been having for months, and it's very important to all of the board members that what we have approved to be built is what we actually see go up.
You'll note as item 23 in the approval resolution is a holding spot provision without the specifics that basically says the building inspector shall not issue the building permit until all the conditions are complied with. We didn't quite have all the conditions yet, but that's the intent of that provision that would be fleshed out when we know the conditions.
Right.
Okay, well, those are my two concerns. And other than that, I'd like to thank the board for its diligence over all this time and accepting the comments from those of us that have been intimately involved in bringing it to this stage.
Thank you. And thank you for all your comments, Saret. They've been very helpful.
Absolutely.
Do we have anyone else with a hand up? Let's check our list here. Yes. Ken Biala? Good, okay.
It's actually Kate. Hello,
I
everybody.
figured it was.
I never remember to go in and change the name. It's Ken's iPad listed under his, so that's why I'm here. Anyway, hello to everybody. I heard about your fall activities. I'm glad everybody's getting a little recreation in before all the hard work starts. I've been looking at the resolution, and the planning board direction part is good to see without limiting the general authority of the planning board. And your direction that they've focused on some of the specific things that we've all expressed concerns about. I'm just wondering what happens if in the process of looking at these matters in the site plan process, I know the board has made certain determinations in the resolution and the SECRA. What happens if during the site plan process, the planning board determines that in fact, the underlying issue may not be supported? Some of the resolutions, the assumptions in the resolutions are not supported. Like, you know what I mean?
Hey,
You
this
guys
is
are all
Jim
muted.
Stout. I'm not sure you do, but let me take a crack at it. I don't know I'm not sure I know what you mean by the underlying assumptions. But if you're saying that, could the planning board override something that is in the contrary to or override a requirement in the special permit determination? The answer would be no. If they felt strongly about it, they would have to somehow bring it back to the village board or recommend the village board reopen things or something like that. But they can't, they would not have the authority to override a provision of the special permit resolution.
Well, and for example, the issue that is still of concern, I think hasn't been addressed completely, is the safety and the traffic aspect with the easement. And I know that there was supposed to be a legal opinion issued about the appropriateness of the easement, or the ability of the easement to be used by everyone for this particular purpose. I know we talked about that at the last meeting. And I think that nobody had a copy of the easement at that point. But there seem to be some assumptions that have been made at this point about the safety of the easement. And my question is whether that has been finally determined because of the way it's been put in the resolution, or does the planning board have the ability to continue to look at that issue and determine whether there are any safety issues or traffic issues? I know there are some, we had that little short memo from Mr. Jacquemart. I'm not sure whether that was meant to be the be all and the end all about traffic, but it didn't seem to be a comprehensive traffic study, if you will, of the impact of traffic backing up off of the easement, et cetera. So my question is, does the planning board have the ability to look at that again? Or, forgive me, sorry about that. Or is that something that's already been decided by virtue of the resolution?
So from a legal standpoint, yeah, the planning board can continue to look at the access way. And in fact, one of the directions of the village board to the planning board in 28C is that they should look at issues regarding the right of way access, including maintenance, garbage deliveries, and snow removal, but it's not limited to those.
Good. Well, as long as it's not limited. It didn't say anything about safety, so that was one of the reasons I was concerned. All right. Well, again, very complicated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Do we have any other hands up? So we received about, I don't know, an hour ago, an edited version back from the applicant with some suggested changes that he's interested in. I can ask them to come on and just explain to the board the reasoning behind each of their, there you go, that's Jonathan Kraut. So Rob, will you please unmute Jonathan Kraut?
Mayor?
Yes.
Is there any way to put the text of these changes on the screen as they haven't been distributed to the public?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
Sorry.
I can pull that up. Here I go again.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Yes.
If you would just wait one moment, Jonathan.
Sure.
Okay. Here, share. Okay. So, does everyone see the document?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I did it again. So this is the document we just received shortly before the meeting, with some edits. And what I would like is for Mr. Crowder, representative of Oak Homes, to just walk through and explain to the board the reasons for the suggestions.
Sure. So, Madam Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees, thank you. It's Jonathan Kraut. And what I would suggest is even before we turn to the red line comments, it might be easier and less distracting if I just gave a high-level overview of what I think are 3 very straightforward areas where we provided comments. And yes, you did get it today, but as you probably know, we first got the draft on Friday, so we really worked on it as quick as we could today to get the comments out. But they're really not, I don't think they'll strike anyone on the board as being on any topics that we have not already been discussed. But let me just lead with the first one, which would be lead certification. So as the board will probably recall, there was a lot of discussion early in the legislative process about whether or not the board would require a LEED certified building. And what happened is, because obviously there's a great deal of expense that goes into a LEED certified building, we eventually landed on a law that essentially looked for it to be what I'm just going to call a lookalike to a LEED without actually the certification. And so we eventually had discussions with your professional staff about how we would achieve a sufficient number of LEED points to satisfy the board's desire. And so on that specific point, it started to get to be a little bit of a tangled ball of yarn. And finally, our internal team and Gary Hirsch at Elk Homes said, you know what, let's make this easy for the village and easy for us, even though it goes beyond what the law requires. And what we're now offering is to provide a LEED certified building, period, full stop. So the suggested change took out sort of the if, then, that, this, and just essentially changed it to that we will provide a LEED certified building. The second area, high level, that we suggested some edits to recognizes the fact, as the board knows, that we have continued to have productive meetings with your architectural design committee. And we're actually down at our last meeting, and Councilwoman Bauer can certainly address it from the board standpoint, but I think we really have made amazing progress. It's been a great, partnership with your advisory committee, and we're down to things like presenting them with actual hard material for things like what is the actual brick color, what does it look like, and things along those lines. So we understand that we all want to move the process forward so that we can get to a building permit and get the building out of the ground. In working towards that effort, while, as Jim Stout pointed out a few minutes ago, you're retaining the architectural jurisdiction, all we simply did is we asked that you insert your standard language provided in section 301 and 301.6 of your village code, which sets forth the standards for architectural review, to make it clear what we're reaching for. But that said, I think that we already are in a place where, with the committee and Perkins Eastman turning around some final design changes based on conversations with them, I think we're in the right place there. The last piece had to do with the PILOP and our request to this board to grant a 50% credit allowance, which is under your code section 38165H, as in Harry. And as you know, we're providing the pedestrian easement, which will be a significant enhancement to the village. And the public amenity fee had, as discussed up till this point, already been based in part upon a perceived deficiency in parking. So we certainly wanted to flag that and didn't want to pay double on that. And so those were, if you want to scroll through the red line, obviously we can talk about any of the mechanical issues in our red line, which, as I said, were all about those three topics: the lead certification, the PILOP, and the architectural review.
There we go. Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to do is now we'll keep the public hearing open, and while we discuss these suggested edits, if anyone has any questions for the applicant. The first one that comes up in scrolling through is the edit, which would reduce any payment in lieu of parking for deficiency by 50%. In exchange for the providing of a permanent pedestrian easement to the village. Does anyone have any questions or?
I'm not sure I understand their rationale for reducing the deficit. I mean, we have an amenity which is separate from the deficient spaces. So I am not inclined to grant any sort of credit. Like the walkway is required by the law, our amenity is required under the law, and the deficiency amount for any parking spaces is required under the law. They're three separate concepts.
Agreed. I thought the pedestrian walkway stood on its own, the way this was drafted, so I'm not quite sure why this is being connected to that.
Well, if I could respond, it's specific to your statute on your PILOP, which is payment in lieu of parking. And just if I could to read section 8, developments that are potentially eligible to request payments in lieu of parking, and clearly we are one, may receive a 50% payment reduction where the Board of Trustees determines that the proposed development includes the offer of donated land or easement to the village that provides a significant enhancement to the village. So respectfully, our position is that what we're proposing falls squarely within the ambit of something that had been given consideration when that provision was enacted. And in fact, this would be a wonderful opportunity for the trustees to follow along with that law, because that would certainly encourage, I would think, as the village over time continues to hopefully attract responsible development, for people to be willing to provide grants of easements in order to enhance the downtown scape.
So,
Again, do you want to go ahead, Carol?
I was just going to say, Jim, that's optional. That's in our discretion, correct?
Yes, it's discretionary.
And further, we wouldn't have called out the pedestrian walkway as a separate requirement of this if we were leaning in that direction, meaning tying the payment in lieu to the pedestrian walkway.
I'll roll on down. So the LEED certification, I'm sure we're going to have some questions. I assume by a LEED certified building, you mean that this is going to go through the regular process of presenting this building?
Yeah, so the way that works is obviously our design team and our construction team would use design methods and materials that would qualify for LEED certification, and we will have the building presented for CO certified as a LEED certified building.
So present. Go ahead, Carol.
To make sure we understand, the process of LEED certification is that the project itself on the front end is certified with the U.S. Green Buildings Council. And then after the project is registered, one then pays the fees And then the Green Building Council, or an arm of the Green Building Council, then evaluates that building to see that it has enough points for, in this case, the bottom level of certification. Are you now saying that you're going to go through that process?
I'm not, I got lost somewhere in the verbiage there. I think what we're saying is that we will document the building, and the building shall be LEED certified by an independent LEED consultant who will be retained by the applicant at our expense.
Okay, so the way LEED works is that the U.S. Green Building Council actually expects a certification, a registering, and then does the certification. We, in our initial discussions, and you, I correctly remember them, said this is time consuming and perhaps costly, but we do want a LEED certified building out of that so that we're assured we're getting what we want. That is why the language that you deleted was in there. We wanted both a LEED monitor to assure that the choices made through the project were in keeping with LEED, and then someone to do a third-party certification.
And following up on what Carol said, I think, you know, from
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say, from a village perspective, I would feel a lot more comfortable if we are in control of that process.
I'm not sure about the control, because the LEED consultants are independents. So it will be like getting a certification from an independent engineer. I don't believe that the village has anyone on staff who would be able to certify the building, nor by the way, do we. So we would have an independent LEED consultant who would give that certification to the village. So I think we're kind of saying the same thing. You're going to get a building that's been certified by an independent third-party LEED consultant.
I guess if our language, I mean, that's basically what our language says. So I'm not quite sure I understand the distinction between what you're proposing and what we originally had.
You know, I don't take a lot of I don't take a lot of pride in authorship. I think it was just simpler to say exactly what we're doing. One sentence that says the building shall be, so there's no question, LEED certified, and it has to be certified by a LEED consultant. So I think we're saying the same thing. I'm not sure what we're missing there.
Well, we're not exactly saying the same thing.
So then help me out.
So once again, the starting point was that we would be giving this process a little bit of flexibility and a bit of a break by not requiring you to go through the formal LEED certification process that many, many, many buildings go through. They register with the U.S. Green Building Council, they pay their fee, and then someone certifies that they've met the LEED standard with the proper number of points. If that wasn't going to happen, then we suggested that we have an independent LEED monitor to assure that the decisions made during construction would meet with a LEED certified building. Because what happens sometimes, not that it would happen here, but I think Surratt actually raised an analogous point. There might be some value engineering that goes on through the project, and it's very hard to correct at the end of the project.
So with respect to that, first of all, I think we may be gravitating in circles, and maybe I'm not being clear enough. We agree with you in that we will go through the certification process, Green Council, et cetera. That was what was intended when we said it would be a LEED certified building. It's not, it's going to be designed that way. It's going to be built that way. It's going to be certified that way. I mean, certainly Jim or Pat can tweak the language in a way that makes you confident that that's what we're going to do, but that's what we're going to do.
So just if I can chime in. So if the third party in this case now becomes the USGBC, so a LEED accredited professional, a LEED AP has to file that certification that Carol referenced. that person can be your person or our person. It doesn't matter. It's then the USGBC that confirms and in fact certifies. So that was the clarification that I didn't hear, Jonathan. So the fact that you will in fact utilize the USGBC process and leave that process with their endorsement, their certification, that's you've clarified our understanding of that point.
Okay, good.
And then we would amend the language so that it reflects the use of the USGBC process,
Absolutely.
registration and certification.
Right. So that there's no misinterpretation.
Right. Now that's
Anyone looking at
clearer.
this. Okay. Okay, very good. Let's roll on down to, well, I guess the rest of it all had to do with this reference to code 301-6, which has to do with approvals given by boards. And what were your concerns that made you want to slip this in here?
I don't think it was slip it in there so much as normally anytime you have architectural control in a zoning law, you have some criteria for it. In this instance, obviously the legislation took us outside of the ARB process. In other words, you've put together your own special advisory committee. And so it just seemed to make a lot of sense to reference standards. If the standards you already have in 301-6 are not good enough in any respect, obviously we would hear what the issues were, but I think that they're pretty clear and they've been tried and true and used in Larchmont for a long time. So that's why it made sense to us.
I think my concerns in reviewing 301-6, and again, we didn't get this very long ago, so I only got to, take a quick look, but is that they seem in this context to be a little vague. And I would be very concerned because, this is an unusual project. It is extremely important to our downtown. And I don't want to be in a position where our advisory committee is quibbling over language in 301-6 that I'm concerned is not as clear as it should be for this particular project.
So I guess I would ask perhaps the obvious question, having looked at 301-6, and frankly, it has all of the hallmarks of architectural review language that we see throughout Westchester and New York in terms of architectural control over commercial structures in very important downtowns. So it's pretty much the same as what we see virtually everywhere else. I don't know what alternative would be proposed to the language in 301-6, but certainly we'd be open to hearing it. It's just that we think that the approval needs to have some, even though, listen, we all know that architecture and aesthetics is inherently a subjective review. You could put together a committee of 15 architects and show them all 4 designs and ask them to rank them best to worst, and you wouldn't get all of them necessarily in the same order. But so we were looking for some level of objectivity layered into that subjective, which is what 301-6 does. So I don't know what ideas you have, Sarah, but certainly we're open to hearing them.
Sorry, go ahead.
What we can do, Sarah, is when we get to deliberations, I'll pull up that code and we can ask some questions of Jim if we need clarification of the code, and for all of us to just take another look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add, Sarah, at this point, or do you want to?
No, I'll wait till we get to that portion of the discussion.
All right. I think that the next section, obviously, if the lead section is altered, that next section would have to be altered in an appropriate way, except for the, we would want to decouple construction manager and lead monitor.
And we certainly would want the planning board in its remit to watch over the lead process.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we would need to be reworded in those.
So A would be reworded.
Yes. I suppose it could be A that's reworded. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. Come back here. Is there anyone else out there who would like to? I see Gary Hirsch has his hand up. So can we unmute Gary? And then we'll.
I don't know if I'm still not, if I'm still unmuted.
No, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Jonathan.
I lost, I don't know if it's the audio, but I lost one of the comments at the end when we're talking about lead with regard to the monitor or the planning board. I didn't quite get what the import of that was. About the planning board following up.
I think it was that we would have to amend the language if the lead section was changed as you suggest, then we have to make amendments to that last portion, which references the lead monitor, but that we would want to include that the planning board just have oversight and make sure that the lead certification process takes place.
Sure, and we certainly don't mind the certifying agent to provide that documentation as we move along. Obviously, if you're getting a certified building, a monitor becomes superfluous and it's not necessary.
Right, right. Did Gary want to speak?
I don't think so.
Okay. So is there anyone else?
Yeah, yes.
Hello, I guess he
Am I
does.
on?
Yes, you're on, Gary.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for your patience with us.
I guess I was wrong.
I guess you were, Jonathan.
Just the smallest of points going back to the pilot fee, okay?
Mhm.
In consideration of the walkway, please recognize that we are giving up at least 2 parking spaces, the area for 2 parking spaces to build the walkway and provide that. And so now not only do we have to give up the spaces and be penalized the spaces, but we're simply asking that we be afforded the same courtesy that would otherwise be given to walkways being provided to the village.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in attendance that would like to speak at this point? If not, I'll be moving to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Up, Saret. I see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She's got her hand up again.
I just want to mention one thing that from this last discussion related to the parking and the fee in lieu of. I agree with the earlier positions of the 2 members of the board that the fee, the separate fee of $25,000 per deficient space, that each one of those items are totally separate, that they are related very specifically to the new zoning, and that whatever already existed for fee in lieu was a generic requirement, and this is a very specific requirement related to this specific zone in this specific location. And related to the comment just that 2 parking spaces are lost, I'm not exactly sure where those are thought to be, but if those were thought to be in the same location as the walkway, then one of the goals of creating a more modernized village is to close those curb cuts. So in no way, shape, or form do I think that those 2 parking spaces would ever be part of any modern plan for a downtown. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I see no other hands, and I seek a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So now we need to deliberate on both the neg deck and the special permit resolution The negative declaration would come first in terms of our adoption. But I think if we're going to potentially make changes to the special permit, perhaps we need to discuss those first. And then we can, before we make any vote, we can revert back to the negative declaration and see how those changes might have to be reflected in that document. Is that fair, Jim?
Yes, and I think you don't have to, except to the extent that you want to make sure you've made clear to Pat and with my assistance what changes you might want to the document. You're not going to have to scrivener the actual language here. You can simply give the substance and direct us to make the changes that conform to the substance you give.
Right.
So you could do it as simply as to say, make sure that the we adopt the neg deck language with the substance of the changes we've discussed here. If it
Okay.
comes to that.
All right. Very good. So let's look at, I had said that I would pull up the code, which I thought I had up. Give me just a moment, please. I thought I had the code, but I'll get it back. And then we can take a look at that one piece of code as a group.
And while you're bringing it up, I'll say that I took a look at that provision of the code beforehand, and I think it is, it does not provide, if you follow just that, for the type of detail in architecture that I think you've been discussing, because it provides that the standard for the Board of Architectural Review, the predicate language is that a building not be excessively, strikingly dissimilar to other buildings in the area.
That was my concern when
Right.
That was my concern, that I felt like it didn't really cover a lot of the issues.
Here we are. Yeah, it's up on the screen right now.
Yeah, so it's important to go up above and read the introductory language. So the predicate language is a building shouldn't be strikingly dissimilar to, let me go back and get my language yet, strikingly dissimilar to other buildings in the commercial area or visually offensive. And in making that determination, you can look at some of the following. I think the review that you've been doing to date goes beyond that.
Yes,
I'm not telling you to agree or not agree, but I think it's important to look at the introductory language. Yeah, striking, right? Because
That's a fairly low bar.
Yeah, I mean, that was my concern, that I feel like the level of discussions that we've been having, though extremely productive, are at a much more significant level of detail than the code provided, so that if, tomorrow, not that they would, the applicant decides that they don't want to make any further changes or engage in any more discussion by putting this language in there, it doesn't give us any ability to make them come back to the table and discuss the level of detail that we want to see in that building. And for something so significant for Larchmont, I'm not comfortable.
So I think now I understand Sarah's concern and the board's discussion on this point. I think it would be a very fair statement to say that we've acted in incredibly good faith. In the most recent iterations, we have come forth with significant changes to please the aesthetic appetite of the advisory committee, and that we are, in fact, it's being received that way, I think, by the architectural committee, with their comments falling along the same vein. I also think it's a true statement that we are down to really the smaller details. I think we've boxed out all the significant ones. So what I would say is, while on the one hand, I recognize that the board may see your language in 3016 as providing more maneuvering room, or whatever phrase you want to use. The flip side of it is, I need to be in a position where my client's not going to have at this 11th hour, requests made where I come back and I say, well, wait a second, that is a pretty expensive and extreme change, and we did not anticipate it. So if you could, if you're not comfortable with our proposal, the only thing I'd ask the board is to have perhaps Pat and Jim put some language in that gives us some margins or contours or boundaries so that we can be just as comfortable. I think it's sort of like we really are at the point where we both need to trust each other to work in good faith. But if we're not comfortable putting 3016 language in there, which is your architectural language for every other property in the village, we're just asking, let's put something in there that shows that at this stage, when you're approving this project, that we are really down to these final small details.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Rob, since the public hearing is over, please mute everyone except the board and the participants from the village, so that anyone who wants to speak at the end, give somebody a chance to speak if needed, or if the board has questions for anyone in attendance, we can unmute them at that point.
All set.
Thanks. Okay, so let me get my there we go. All right, sharing again. So the first item up here is the request for a reduction of the standard fee. I completely agree with what has already been said. This is a special zoning code. That requirement was built into this code. I think it stands completely separate from the base requirement of parking, the payment in lieu, and the pedestrian walkway all stand separate from each other. The fact that in order to meet the requirement of the code by providing the pedestrian walkway, changes to the design of the building or the lot had to be made is just part of providing the amenity that was required by the law. So I'm not in favor of making a reduction here. And at this point, I think we're only talking about maximum 3 spaces, minimum 1 space. So, this is not a large deficit that we're discussing. Anyone?
I
Have
agree,
anything
Lorraine.
else to add? Okay.
No, not inclined to incorporate that language.
We'll slide on down to the lead. I think that if Jim and Pat can make certain changes to this wording so that it's clear that what we've discussed is reflected here, in that the lead certification is the true process as discussed and described with the U.S. Green Building Council.
Yep. Got it.
Then I think I would be inclined. I think this is a better product, and it certainly is a clear process. So this change I would be inclined to incorporate.
And Mayor, the formal process could be done or can be certified by a consultant retained by the village. But if we're going through the formal process, are we comfortable with the consultant being retained by the applicant?
So if I can explain something, Carol, in order for the USGBC, in order for an application to be made, a lead accredited professional, a lead AP, must be involved in the project. The USGBC certifies the lead APs. I happen to be one. So anyone doing the certification process, it almost doesn't matter if you work for the applicant, for the municipality, you're effectively working for the USGBC. So as long as it's a lead accredited professional, that's fine. And again, the certification comes from USGBC. So they will confirm what the lead accredited professional submits.
Right. And I know that, having been involved with lead projects. So I wanted everyone to understand what we were doing here. So thanks for that explanation.
And so we would want that language included in the edit, that it's a lead approved.
With the
Right.
formal process,
Right.
et cetera. So
Yeah.
yes. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, very good. We'll have some things at the end that will relate to that change. We'll get to those in a second. And then we have what we just discussed in terms of setting a final approval of the building materials subject to the standards set forth in 301-6. I don't think that the village is shown ourselves to be asking for gold-plated fixtures and anything beyond what one would expect the representatives of a special village like Larchmont to expect. I don't like that wording, and I have to say thanks for pointing out what is probably a deficiency in our code and will need to be altered. We just haven't had that many building projects in our commercial districts, so it hasn't come up too much in recent times. So I would be disinclined to include this language, and I don't know that I'm inclined to try to craft some vague boundaries that, you know, to describe what's in and what's within the boundary and what's without the boundary. I just don't see that that's a productive way to spend our time. I'd rather just move this ahead and get to a resolution of the design, which seems like the group is working really well towards.
Right, yeah, and having been involved in the process, I have no idea what we would even craft. I mean, I don't think I think we've shown ourselves to be acting in good faith, and we've moved this process forward consistently. I don't think it's necessary. And again, I don't even know what it would say.
I would also say, if you remember how we teed this up, the village board is retaining a fair amount of authority over projects in this zone, and to put bells and whistles on the special permit, we'd have to be very careful not to undermine the authority that was laid out when we originally did the zoning law. So I think it stands the way it stands, where the village board has that approval authority.
Any other comments, Trustee Finelli?
No, I just wanted one quick thing, going back just a little bit. The CBC, would we want to interview that candidate? Whoever that might
Pat, you mean for the lead certification?
Yeah, but I don't think you need to do that. Again, to become a lead accredited professional, it's a very rigorous process. So there are very few folks that have that qualification. And once the Green Building Council's gives someone that certification, they're qualified. I don't think you have to worry about whether you've got the best guy. In order to meet that standard, it's rigorous.
So we're just going to make sure that the language lays out that it is
Lead AP.
Lead AP, right. Mm-hmm.
By the way, they get points for that too.
Okay, so, and further on,
so we need to leave in the language about the third-party construction manager. Because we
right.
still want that, even if the.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So in what is was 24, marked up in the marked up version here is 21. Third-party construction monitor, always required. Certainly for this special permit, we've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's very important to this board that there be a construction monitor representing the interests of the village in overseeing the project. This project is much larger than the usual village project, and I don't think that we can leave this sort of oversight to our regular small staff. So we'll want to keep that in. Of course, the lead monitor comes out.
Mhm.
Right, that would come out.
Yeah, that will come out. Okay.
I think this is Jim. I think where you are is that you're at a resolution as was drafted on your behalf with one change, and this would be both for the neg deck and the special permit if the language is needed to be changed in the neg deck. The one change being the change to the lead language that you directed and discussed here this evening. Everything else stays the same. I think that's where you are at this moment.
Right. And so, Jim, in the planning board direction, do we need to also make sure that what we had said about the planning board just following the process of lead certification, or I would assume it's required by the special permit. So the certification and that whole process, the paperwork, et cetera, needs to be presented to the board before there would be any C of Os or anything else granted for the project. So we don't, maybe we don't need to include anything in here.
Well, I wouldn't say normally that it would be, if this were a condition of your approval, I would not say normally that it would be something that would come back to your board. It would be presented to your, to Pat probably, and in his advice to the building department, whether compliance with the condition had been had in order to allow the building permit to be issued, at least on this point. It wouldn't come back to your board, not normally.
It would not.
No more than any of the other compliance with any of the other conditions would come back.
Okay. But somebody along the way is making sure that that happens. Yes?
Yes, for sure.
Well, but there's no downside to include, this provision says, without limiting general authority, the village board directs the planning board to include in its review the following, and we call out specific things. So there's no reason to not call out lead there.
No, I think that's fine, Carol. I think Jim's point is, but it doesn't have to come back to your board to say that.
I would
yeah,
agree to that.
Yeah.
I would agree to that.
Right. Correct. We have a chat statement / question from Jonathan Kraut that his expectation is that the building permit fee covers inspections and monitoring. Not sure what the difference intended here is here. The building permit fee certainly covers inspections. I don't think that it covers the sort of in-depth construction monitoring that a large project requires. For the houses on Vandenberg, the construction of an intersection. We've had several projects recently, large projects where independent construction managers were hired to follow that, on a somewhat regular basis. Construction is progressing as per the approvals, and that materials that were identified were in fact being used. Our building inspector does not, we have a building inspector and a secretary and a busy department, and they don't have the amount of time it would take to give the proper monitoring and oversight to a construction project of this size. And I think, have I fairly represented that requirement?
I
The
think
need
what
for it.
Jonathan's getting to is they don't want to pay twice. So they pay a building permit fee and then pay another fee that duplicates the same activities. So what you're saying is it wouldn't be a duplication, they're
No.
separate.
They're separate, right? Mhm. And it's quite common. I think then that would be the extent of changes to this document. So we're gonna roll back to the neg deck. Of course, I would, if there's anything that the board wants to ask about, question that's specific to the neg deck, that's not just verbatim from the special permit. I know that there was some minor feedback on Friday that has been incorporated.
Before we get into the neg deck, I just want to ask a quick question on the access. If in fact that access doesn't work, what's the plan in case between the garbage trucks, the maintenance, Verizon going in there? What happens if that doesn't work for the people getting out of the parking lot? Is there any other backup plan that the planning board might want to know about?
The planning board has asked the applicant to address alternatives. The planning board has come around to the fact that the easement is the most appropriate method of dealing with this, subject to addressing the safety issues and so forth that are being discussed at the moment. But the right of access across the easement was established as the applicant's right. They have a right to use the easement, and whether or not it's safe is an ongoing discussion with the planning board. So that's still being worked on. And how the garbage is addressed and all of those issues are planning board issues in their wheelhouse at the moment.
And will the answer to those issues be articulated in the building permit?
In the site plan approval,
Site plan approval.
it will get transferred to the building permit as well. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was part of or listened to some of the preliminary discussions on what would happen in case of an emergency, in case there were utility lines that needed to be dug up or the easement compromised in any way. And I would expect that those concerns would be answered at the planning board level.
That's right, Carol, absolutely.
Are there any other questions or suggested edits to the negative declaration?
I don't have any.
Okay.
Lorraine, there's one minor edit that's been recommended by the applicant on the issue of the impact on municipal services on the top of page 14. And that paragraph speaks to the fact that the building's not designed to accommodate a large number of school-aged children. And then it speaks to the fact that there aren't certain amenities. And the applicant has asked that reference to the amenities be deleted. And it's my understanding, and Jim may know this better than I, that language in particular was challenged in another municipality, and that caused some problems with it. So it would simply eliminate yards, open areas, or recreational amenities geared toward young children. It still says that the project has been designed that way, but it's just eliminated that language. So I don't think it's a substantive change.
So it's just that one sentence?
Correct. Yep, and everything else remains in place.
And that's okay with me. I think that's fine. I understand the reasoning and I think that's fine.
Yeah. I had a note to myself in my special permit which I forgot to read to the group. So I'm gonna, if you'll forgive me, jump back to the special permit for a second. And this was in section 10, which is the section on the whether or not the requirement for pedestrian access has been met. The last sentence, the applicant shall grant to the village an easement to this walkway satisfactory to village council. Village council, can you add into their language of legal language, and I'm not a lawyer, to the extent that it makes it clear that included in that easement would be that the maintenance of the walkway would be by the owner and not by the village?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Back to the negative declaration. So that sentence, yards, open areas, or recreational amenities are not proposed, would be removed. Do we have any other edits or questions on the neg deck?
Not at this time.
Okay, so then I would seek a motion to adopt the negative declaration with changes reflected in it that have been made both directly to the neg deck and to the special permit. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. Thank you. And then we move on to the special permit. I seek a motion to adopt the special permit with the changes made here tonight, specifically referencing the edit for lead certification and the inclusion of maintenance of the walkway in the easement language. And any other recommendations that we made during this long conversation, but I think they all stem basically from that one change to the lead certification. Now, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Yay. We've moved to a new phase. Now let's just get the architecture where we need it to be. Great, I'm very happy that we got to this point. And thank you to everyone who participated and all the comments and feedback that we've had over the process. I think that's it. We don't have any other business, correct? Jim and Pat, you have everything you need from us now? Okay, very good. So then do I need to adjourn this meeting? Yeah.
Hold on. No, I mean, now you could just close it like you would close any village board meeting.
Yeah, I seek a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have is there anyone out there who wants to address the board at this point? Before I close the meeting, I have Kate's hand is up.
Yeah, I was actually just going back to a comment that Mr. Cleary made. He said that there was a question about the egress, and he said that the planning board seems to have come around now to the idea that that form of egress is appropriate in response to Trustee Finelli's question. And I'm not clear when that actually happened. I'm looking at the planning board memo that they sent to you after their July 16th meeting, and they referred it back and said, board recommends that the planning board recommends that the village board follow up on the discussion with the applicant. So is there some other piece in there that's missing in terms of their having come around to the idea that it's appropriate?
Let me clarify, Kate, they haven't rendered that decision yet. They have said they will continue the review of the plan that's pending before them, which is the rear access. So that's the
Okay. So the continue of the review in the site plan process. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you very much. So I had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good
Night,
night.
everybody. Thank you.